everybody, and welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore coming at you from Breckenridge, Colorado. Today on the show, we do something a little different. We have a CEO, real-life CEO, J.R. Rahn of MindMed. I've been working to get J.R. on the show for ages. Finally able to pull it off, and I hope y'all like this one. We get into it about the drug war a little bit, drug policy, and a little bit of conversation around the LSD trip stopper. We had some disagreements, but I think it's really important that y'all hear it and hear both sides, right? So overall, to me, the most exciting thing about MindMed, the fact that they're researching so much LSD. Like, I just don't understand why other groups aren't spending so much time on LSD. It's a credible compound. A little bit goes a long way. And yeah, just really stoked that they're doing this. Really excited for JR to be able to come on. So thank you, JR. I hope we get to do it again. And this whole psychedelic industry, psychedelic scene is evolving so much quicker than any of us could ever really understand. And it's, I hear every single day about another company in the psychedelic space that I've never heard of before. So MindMed being one of the largest, backed by Kevin O'Leary of Shark Tank and others. I think most famous backer is Kevin. Yeah. So anyway, I think that's it for the intro. I hope y'all enjoy this one. Let me know what you think. Psychedelics Today email at Gmail, or hit us up on some of the socials out there. Yeah, I guess that's it on the intro. There's probably some seats left on our Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists course. I think we're sold out for Group 1 and for Group 2. As of the recording of this on Friday the 26th, we've got 2 slots left for the PM course. So if it's sold out by the time you get over there, get on our wait list. Maybe some spots will open up for you. If not, we're going to be launching more soon. So stay tuned. You can definitely keep yourself occupied with the other courses we got there too, from free and paid courses. So check that out, psychedelicEducationCenter.com. And if you have questions, please reach out. All right, that's enough for the intro. Here's JR from MindMed. Enjoy it. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today on the show, we have J.R. Rahn, founder and CEO of MindMed. Thanks for joining us today, J.R.
Thanks for having me on, Joe.
Yeah. Looking forward to our conversation. You've been a hot topic for a while, and I'm really happy to finally connect with you here.
Yeah, me too. It's been a while in the making, but here we are to have a conversation, and I think that's super important in this sort of whirlwind that has become psychedelics. I think more conversation would be better, and less division, more unity.
That would be nice. It's a tough jam, but I think over time we'll get there, and I'm sure we'll get into some of that and why that is the case later on. But JR, let's kind of start with a little bit about you, like where you came from and what got you interested in this psychedelic topic.
Sure. Well, I was born in Springfield, Massachusetts, which I think was, at one point was rumored to be where, The Simpsons was based off of. And I think Blondie was, where Homer worked and all that. So sort of uninspiring town in the middle of Massachusetts or Western Massachusetts. Sort of grew up there, went to school in a very Northeast-centric liberal environment. And then my family moved to Miami, and it was sort of like the complete opposite of what I was sort of living or in being brought up in the Northeast. But also in my childhood, really, had sort of a traumatic experience in that my mother passed away when I was 8 years old, and had to learn to raise myself in many ways.
Yeah.
And I think that was actually a deeply beneficial experience in hindsight, that I became very independent because of it. But then I went back to the Northeast. I went to Hamilton College in upstate New York, which is where Alexander Hamilton founded it, and I think has now become a very popular college because of the play. Hamilton. I studied Chinese there, and politics. Mainly was studying international relations, and I moved to China right after college. It was sort of in the midst of 2009, the last financial crisis, and moved out and was set up a company in China for a number of years, and then started working for this little company at that time called Uber.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's sort of the journey.
Cool. And what struck your interest, or how did you first start getting interested in psychedelics, perhaps professionally or whatnot?
Well, I think my interest came out of a personal journey
Hmm.
and healing process. Right. It was mainly because of the psychedelics community that I'm probably, actually, no, I can say that with complete confidence that the reason that I'm having this podcast with you today and still, a human on this earth is because of the psychedelics community
Mm.
that helped get me here and give me the support that I ultimately needed. I was at the height of my career in Silicon Valley. I had left Uber. Was going through the Y Combinator program, sort of like the Harvard of tech startups. Had a successful startup out there. We raised a bunch of money, had contracts with a bunch of big companies in the fintech space,
Hmm.
and was at the same time going through a personal crisis of epic proportions. I was struggling with a cocaine addiction. I was drinking myself to sleep. I was going through a divorce, and I wasn't well. I wasn't mentally fit. And a friend asked, well, didn't ask, they told me, like, look, you need to stop drinking and you need to stop using cocaine and Xanax and all these things because you're going to kill yourself. And you should embark on a journey around psychedelics. And so I started with psilocybin, and that was deeply helpful. But I think my sort of major breakthroughs came through some LSD experiences, sort of seeing some traumatic events in my life that ultimately came out and I think helped recalibrate what I was dealing with on a daily basis. And that was mainly the death of my mother and the guilt associated with the death of my mother. But yeah, that was the basis of how I got involved professionally with psychedelics. Was through that healing process, I realized, well, why aren't these medicines? Why are these substances Schedule One, and why are we not working on them and allocating capital as a society to turn them into medicines? It just seemed completely illogical to me, and so that's how I set up MindMed.
So how did you, like, when you were looking at that, what did you find? Like, why weren't they being researched?
Well, I think they were being researched. I just don't think they were being allocated the necessary capital to ultimately bring a whole new asset class and a healing process forward so that the entire society could access it. I mean, there was plenty of academic work going on, right, at Hopkins, at Imperial, University Hospital Basel, and then sort of sprinkling of other researchers around the country and the world. But they were doing it on like a shoestring budget, right? Like,
Right. That's where I say, like,
yeah,
maybe it wasn't plenty. It was an okay start.
yeah, and like I just, it just seemed illogical. It was like, okay, I remember one researcher telling me, I was like, yeah, and we just got this $50,000 grant and we're so excited about it. And I'm like, well, that's not going to really like move your needle very much. I mean, yes, it's great for you as an academic researcher, but like, if you want to turn these into medicines, like, they're going to cost real capital and money. And at the same time, I was sort of looking around at the space, and there was nonprofits like USONA and MAPS, and for profits like Compass, but I just didn't think it was enough. Like, it just was. It had taken so long to progress to where we were. This was like 2.5 years ago, and I just basically came to the conclusion that the way to solve this is through more capital. Because ultimately, if you want to unite people towards a common goal, those people need to make a living. They need to feed their families, and we need to give them an incentive to want to help other people. And so that's how I've always approached business and life, and is like, how do you make a sustainable model that actually solves a problem? Like, these are large problems, right? So in Silicon Valley, I was solving problems like, how do people get a taxi like more efficiently, right? That's what Uber solved. And my previous company was like, how do we finance Apple devices, right? Those are small problems, really, in sort of retrospect. We were able to access a funding mechanism in Silicon Valley, which basically rewards risk and, allows people to solve problems. Like, I think the venture capital funding mechanism is really interesting because it like actually does solve some problems. Sometimes it doesn't solve like the most important problems in society, and it doesn't allocate resources to that. But I think also a lot of entrepreneurs are having sort of a transition, which is like, how do I build a really big business but also impact society in
Right.
a net positive way? And so like that, MindMed is my version of that. How do we solve the problems of mental health and addiction that exist in the United States and in other countries? And how do we allocate society's capital to focus on that? Because we should. They're really big problems. 10% of Americans considered suicide in the month of June, 11% considered suicide in the month of June. 40% had some form of a substance abuse disorder or a mental health incident. Like, that's a pretty big addressable market. And I just wasn't convinced that we were going to be able to do it only with charitable donations.
Right. Like, we just look at how long MAPS has taken, which I don't want to criticize MAPS too much, but like that's a really long fucking project. And a pharma, like a standard pharma company probably could have done it in 5 years, not 30, But because it's not patentable, MDMA, because it's so old, there's some financial issues there. Now, I kind of want to back up, JR. You mentioned like at the beginning, like why weren't we really looking at these things? And, people that listen to the show all the time, like they know my kind of shtick here. It's the drug war and kind of all this propaganda we have to spend our way out of and work our way out of. It's really not factual. And this drug war that's killed lots of people and is highly unethical. And we're still paying tax dollars to fund the DEA to put people in prison for nonviolent crimes. So it's kind of, that's a talking point that I always like to bring up. And that's, to me, the real why. This was because Nixon was afraid of losing control of the country during Vietnam, and he had to make an enemy. And that enemy was LSD, cannabis, and Tim Leary. Well, also the Panthers and some other black rights movements. But it's a really tough thing, and we have to understand that that's one of the reasons why we're still digging our way out. Yeah. So, and I totally agree with you about capital. Like, we really need private groups to bring new drugs to market, but there needs to be appropriate incentives. And it's kind of hard because all these drugs are so old now. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to comment like on talking about drug policy and, what does that mean for society, and like, why do we still have stigma against, right? Like, for example, LSD. It's because of headlines that happened in the 1960s, right? In a political environment that probably at the time seemed quite crazy, but I think given recent events in the last few months, probably would seem quite normal. But I think the war on drugs is how it's executed. Like, yeah, clearly there's question marks there, right? Should people that
I'm not saying question marks.
Yeah,
no, like I got my sights on the DEA, and they know it.
I hear you.
Yeah,
I think though there are sort of two fundamental issues that you were addressing there, which is, people shouldn't necessarily go to jail because they have an addiction to a substance. Like, if that's the case, I should be in prison for life, right? Because I was a terrible drug addict and alcoholic.
And in some countries, because of the drug war, you actually get murdered by the government for it.
Yeah, there's like mass hunts.
And that's a result of us, our global policy. But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so but at the same time, like, as a society, we need to prioritize treatment, and we don't, right? We prioritize this.
Portugal is the model, in my opinion, even though they're broke as hell. Like, I think we could do better than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we also should like set up the necessary infrastructure to actually help people, right? Like it's just like just completely illogical to me that as a society we stare it in its face like every day and we blame the opioid crisis and we blame drug addiction for our crime and all these things, but yet like as a society like we don't allocate the resources necessary to like solve it. And I think if we did that, like we'd probably be a lot better off.
Yeah, 100%. Like the DEA is buying like tanks, airplanes, and sweet guns. They're not really setting up therapy offices to help people get the help they need.
Yeah, but I mean, so look, I think there's a lot of things that the DEA like should do better, right? But at the same time, like I don't approve of the traffickers and the drug dealers that addict people. Like that to me is just that's far worse, right? Like they're profiting off of somebody's weakness. It's like a terrible, terrible business to be in. And a lot of those people have really fancy guns and really fast submarines.
But it's only there because of drug policy, though.
Well, totally.
Of bad drug policy.
Like, and we need better drug policy in the United States. Like, I'm not disputing that fact. I'm just stating like, the DEA is fighting something that they are told to fight, right? And so if the country says, hey, look, actually what we should be fighting is the treatment of all these individuals, and let's allocate the resources to now heal people, I just think that would be like a much, much better allocation of our country's resources. And so like we can argue about drug policy, but until like we start voting in measures that like, hey, there needs to be treatment infrastructure, basic treatment infrastructure for people that can't afford it. Like to me, that is like the fundamental problem. Like, yes, we need to keep people out of jails, and they need to go into treatment. And I think there are like cities doing that, right? Like there are.
Well, Oregon just voted that in with the help of Drug Policy Alliance.
Yeah, no, totally. And like Chan Zuckerberg supported that. Like there's a lot of high profile resources that are taking this very seriously, and this isn't just like a grassroots thing anymore, right? It started very, very grassroots, and like that's amazing that people spent time to focus on that. But we need to have a narrative on how do we create a solution to addiction, right? Psychedelics are not going to be the end all be all that fixes that.
Right. They're a part.
Yeah. But I agree with you. Like drug policy needs to be reformed. And more importantly, like the infrastructure needs to exist for everyone. Like it can't just the drug and addiction treatment sort of model that exists in America. I don't think it's really, terrible analogy, but it's not really moving the needle, right? It's broken. And so like while we're passing these measures, right, to decriminalize drugs, right, I would hope that we are also like thinking about the necessary treatment infrastructure for all the folks that actually need it, and so that they're not just out on the street. So I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
My view.
So you're not super opposed to decrim. You just want to see that there is infrastructure in place to help these people in the event of a spike in cases or something.
Yeah, like I'm not opposed to decrim. I think I've been construed in many ways. Like I think there's like that Forbes article where it's like, oh, I want nothing to do with decrim people. And like, I definitely said that, but that's not really what I meant. What I meant was if we're going to make psychedelics into a medicine and we're going to make it scalable and accessible, I think we should be having a federal conversation about it. And to me, the most efficient pathway to do that is the FDA. And I'm concerned that we're going to go through this process of state by state legalization that happened in the cannabis days. And we're going to get some pretty unsavory people sort of involved in this community and what is really should be, focused on therapeutics. And I'm just concerned that if it happens in that manner, it becomes a political battle, and it doesn't become, how do we help people? How do we get medicine to folks that are in need? Like that's my mission in life, right? Is how do I help people that have the same problems that I had, right? Not everybody is a drug addict, is, suffering from mental health issues, but there's a lot. There's 40% of the country is. And so I want to start with that 40%. And then let's have the political discussion about, how do we legalize? How do we put better drug policy in place? But like, I'm just like, the way that I think as an entrepreneur is like, how do we deal with the trauma? Okay, let's like set up a triage. And that's like sort of what we're trying to do. So I would just like, I'd love for everyone to have a psychedelic experience. Like, it was life-changing for me. I'm not so sure the rest of society is ready for that. Like in Oregon, for sure, yeah, they're like clearly ready. They voted on it and they told us that. Is Georgia? I don't know.
I see what you're saying.
Does the Georgia senator come into the Senate and say, hey, this can't happen like cannabis, and now we have an even bigger problem, and suddenly clinical trials start getting halted? I just don't want to politicize the issue. That's like my main argument.
That makes, I see where you're coming from. It makes a lot of sense coming from what you're doing. Yeah. And I guess like what we bump up against, like the cultures that kind of perspective bump up against is, people that are going after religious use. Like for some people, this is their religion. And this is how they access God. And their religion is not protected by the federal government because we don't have enough money for lawyers to get protection that we want for our religions. And, then there's this whole like party world. Like, should Miami get rid of Ultra? Like how much LSD and mushrooms goes down there? Or like, I'm a pretty big, Fish and Grateful Dead person. So I'm, breaking the law multiple times per summer. I'm currently not experiencing substance use disorder, though sometimes I wish I was, given the pandemic, but I'm not. And, like this is, like there's a lot of branches here, right? So we've got like, medical, which is super important. People are killing themselves. People are very hurt right now, and they're going to keep getting sicker and sicker as this very grim winter approaches. And, unfortunately, I don't think the FDA is going to grant like emergency provisions the same way they are for the vaccines. But, perhaps like, at least we're getting some drugs fast tracked, put it that way. But then, okay, so we got that medical thing, but then we've got religious, we've got just inner exploration, which kind of verges on religious and spiritual for a lot of people. And then, partying, celebratory use. Then we've got creative problem solving to help dig us out of the looming ecological crisis, multi-pronged 4 horsemen of the apocalypse almost coming at us, climate change, peak oil, like all sorts of weird stuff, germs now added to it. So we've got like a lot on our plate. And I agree with you that I want this to be medicine ASAP. But I also like, it's really hard for me to say which one is more important, because I can't really in good conscience say what I think is, I don't know what I think is most important, but I kind of unfortunately want the whole thing. But I understand my project is going to be 20 years, 30 years long versus, 2 to 5 years to bring a drug to market. I don't really know what the timeline is, but that's kind of like the world we're bumping up against. I don't have clean answers, and I totally respect what you're doing, JR. I just think this whole psychedelic world is so big and diverse that it's going to be really hard to get everybody on board with one kind of direction here.
Yeah. And like, I totally agree with you. Like, it's we barely can choose a leader right now for this country. Let's like, take one day at a time. But like, again, like my whole point is like, look, I'd love to have everything all at once, and eat my cake as well. But the fact of the matter is like, people are dying, there are like really big problems in society, and they're about to get a lot worse. Like,
Yes,
let's
no doubt.
let's not like, sugarcoat the fact that that 40% might become a lot bigger, you know, multiple forces at play there, right? So like we already have huge problems with mental health and addiction, but AI and automation are set to, and according to a McKinsey report, I think replace something like somewhere between like 350 to 800 million jobs by 2030.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty existential threat. People no longer can wake up and have something to do in the morning. Wonder where they end up, right? So I just think that we also need to like prioritize and place a value on like, is it more important for folks to have like a great Fish concert right now, which isn't even happening?
Oh, I'm probably not going to have one until 2022, unfortunately. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
I'm hoping these things are prescribable before that point.
I love Fish. I mean, I grew up on Fish, grew up on the
Hell yeah.
Dead. Like my dad cried when Jerry Garcia died. Like I remember the day. I think it was like 94 or 95. Like, I remember him sitting on our back porch in Massachusetts crying. And he was just like, one day you'll know. I think it was like 7 or 8 years old at that time. And yeah, now I know. But like I also cried when one of my really good friends died of an overdose. And I probably could have helped him. Right. And so, what should I care more about right now? Like,
right. And I blame that on prohibition, and lack of education and lack of priority on funding. But yeah, like totally. This is where we're at. We're at this like kind of weird cultural crisis point where we're all a little bit confused about what's priority. Like, do we want to put people in jail for decades for possession? Do we want to, ruin families for generations? Or do we want people to heal? Like, we all want people to heal. I think that's where we're all on the same team. We want people to feel better, not be in prison and harmed for not harming somebody else. We want people to get the help they need when they need it. Like, this is kind of our humanist culture. And sometimes, we need to bring drugs to market to address that. Like, it's a really big deal. Yeah. I'll still lean on, I don't have a clean answer, but yeah, like,
well,
I don't want anybody to go in jail because, hepatitis is not a joke. And that's pretty common in prison, and prison's pretty traumatic. And then you'll need to be a customer getting psychedelic psychotherapy after that or something,
Well, I think like nobody wants to go to prison, right? Like it's
correct.
Nobody wakes up and goes, that's where I want to be. Like, I don't think you're going to hear me argue against that. So yeah, I mean, like I hear you. I also rationalize and understand the political environment that we're in this country. I understand, that change doesn't come overnight. And I've always like when I've had to deal with a situation that needed change, it's like a progression. Progression's always, to me, the best way forward. Because when you have just outright protest, while it gets people thinking, it doesn't necessarily translate into action, right? And so I'm politically a moderate. Like I don't side with one party, pretty center of the road on multiple things. And I think our community, drug policy, politics, just everyday life, I feel like if people are just a little more moderate, we might all just get along a little bit better. And I know that sounds very idealist, but what happened to the moderates, right? Like, why are we at like these two polar opposites?
The media environment killed it, I think.
Yeah, maybe it was Fox News. I mean, like, I don't know. Like, I'm really confused as like where the moderates went.
So, JR, I think we beat this one pretty good for a bit. So let's, if you're okay with it, start talking about MindMed a little more. So, like, you guys are bringing some interesting stuff to market. What can you tell me? What are you guys working on?
Well, our lead program right now, or lead programs, really focus on LSD. So both experiential doses of LSD for anxiety and microdosing. We're looking at adult ADHD.
Do you have a study ongoing for the microdosing?
So the microdosing it just actually got positive feedback from the regulators in the Netherlands and Switzerland on
Great.
our protocol design. And to my knowledge, it's the first commercial drug trial that's been approved for microdosing of LSD for the protocol and assessment.
Yeah. I think that's very true. I watch a lot globally, and I believe that is the case. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just super careful when I say things, especially in this space, because now everybody is like the world leader and
Yeah.
just,
What made you think microdosing, like, were those huge studies that Fadiman and Korb did kind of enough anecdotal data to want to go for it?
I think it was like sort of, yes, Fadiman's interesting. Whether Fadiman has like the ultimate protocol, I don't know yet. Like,
Oh, it was more that huge research study.
Yeah.
Like a ton of anecdotal data.
there's a ton of like, that was a big part of it.
Yeah.
I think also what I saw was when I talked about microdosing with like the average person, like they weren't scared of it. It's like, oh,
Right.
a small amount. Okay. All right. So at the same time, we have people with ADHD. Like I'm one of them. I'm part of Generation Adderall. Right.
I never got diagnosed, but I wish I did. Yeah.
No, you actually don't, because
All right.
I can tell you that for a fact.
All right.
Like I was brought in, I think like when I was like 13 or something.
Oh, it's pretty early.
Yeah. It's like had my bar mitzvah and then like, here's a bottle of Ritalin, like have fun.
Oh,
And so like, imagine what that does to your brain, right? From the age of 13, you're given a stimulant every single morning. It can't be good.
no.
And, I think a lot of my generation is going like, how do I get off of this stuff? Because I think it was like Ritalin or Adderall. I was reading like this. There's a book called ADHD Nation, and then there's another one. But I believe that Ritalin and Adderall were like originally used for like narcolepsy or something before they
Makes sense.
medicines or like some stimulant that sort of maybe it was a precursor to Ritalin. Like I remember reading this, and I was like, oh, that's great. Like that's definitely what we should hop up all the kids on. And so like that's become a lifelong addiction to stimulants. And like that, while completely legal, to me doesn't make any sense. And so now I'm an adult and I still have ADHD. It's not going anywhere. And microdosing, yeah, like kind of works, right? So like why shouldn't we understand that, but prove it scientifically instead of anecdotally?
Yeah, 100%. Like we on the show, like I've not been able to have a firm opinion on microdosing because there's not much clinical data, if any.
It's very limited.
Like I can't wait for there to be actual clinical data so I can speak like honestly about it.
Yeah, I think most researchers sort of they're like, stay away from it. They're like, well, experiential works. Like, just like, why don't you do psychedelics as therapy? Like, it's pretty easy to understand that works. I mean, we need to prove it in a way that the FDA understands it. But I think anyone that's sort of listening.
I like that phrasing, by the way. It's like, we got to have enough data to prove it to regulators, even though we have decades of data. It's kind of crazy. Well, I really appreciate that you chose LSD, by the way. I don't think anyone's
concerned about the toxicology of LSD or psilocybin.
No. No, it can't be. That's ridiculous if you were.
It's like, but yet I have to do that work. And like, I'm fine doing that work because at least it's like spelled out on like how I can achieve that potential approval, right? Like it's very clear. It's not a political process where I have to like go and lobby a bunch of people, to get on board with it. It's like, nope, like this person had anxiety and now they don't. To me, that's pretty cool, right? Like just like rely on the data. Like forget all the fucking rhetoric, like the data.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many studies, so much data already available.
Which is even more of a reason that we should go down this path, because it's like, we kind of know it's going to work, right? Like, but
Yeah,
we just need to make sure that
absolutely.
it works in a rigorous science, FDA manner. And, so I feel like a lot of the work's been done for us. We just need to create the new data and parse it. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And microdosing, I think it's like the one area of psychedelics where nobody really actually has a clue. No one has like the data set to prove it otherwise. Like, I think from the 50s and 60s, there's a ton of historical data on LSD, for example, right?
Yeah.
Less so on psilocybin, actually. So let's just like do the work.
Yeah. So because you're working with LSD, and LSD was, first developed in the 40s, how is MindMed able to protect that? Because this is kind of a big deal, right? Like, you put in all this money to do these trials, and this is kind of like a pretty well known. I think it's open off patent at this point because it's from the 40s. But how do you protect your investment there? Like, do you have to
Yeah.
do some
So the original patent
procedural work, or
was filed for LSD. I have a copy of it somewhere by Hoffman, I think in like 46. Yeah. So what we understand is that like LSD's out there, right? It's like been out there. It's been in
yep,
how many millions of people, right? So we're not going to try to patent the molecule. That's not like our objective.
mm-hmm.
I think like we should work on things that are novel and create value. And so like we're patenting things like, what is the optimal dose level, like studied in rigorous science manner?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get to ego dissolution? Right. That's stuff I'm interested in because that helps therapists heal people better. Like nobody has actually done that work. Those dose range finding studies, they cost money. And so I think if we're going to have the best medicine out there, we should have the ability to like fund that and also be rewarded for it, and not just have people copy us. But I believe in like real innovation and like real work, not just some like the synthesis of LSD has been known for quite some time, right? Like we're not.
Yep, no doubt.
We're not filing patents against that. So also like how can we make the experience more therapeutic? I think classic psychedelics open the market. And like I hate to use this word because it's like kind of a big faux pas, but I think classic psychedelics are the gateway, right? Like people will become more comfortable with these substances if we can get FDA approvals for LSD, psilocybin, DMT, and actually prove to society that we're healing people.
Right.
And then I think down the line, there needs to be a lot more innovation. And I think if we're talking about treating people, or if we're talking about creating a therapeutic, there are going to be more efficient ways to help heal people. And so we'll look at the next generation, and that is ultimately how we see we're going to build a larger business on top of the classic psychedelics. And the technologies around how to integrate these into mainstream psychiatry, right?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Talk a lot about like sort of like the self-use of psychedelics and various healing processes on your own, and that's great. And I know a lot of people who have been healed on their own. I think the average person though isn't there yet.
I would tend to agree. It's a little gung-ho.
Yeah, very much gung-ho. I think they want to talk to their doctor, assess the risk, and do it in a controlled environment. And ideally, that environment's like in the comfort of their own home, right? I think that's like the most comfortable place that this can all happen. To me, the psych ward and the psychiatrist's office, or even like these clinics that are sprouting up for ketamine usage, like to me, that's not the most comforting place. And that's probably not how you scale psychedelics to the point where you actually heal most of the country. Like that's a lot of real estate, and real estate's really expensive to build out. It's not scalable. And so I'd like to get to the point where a therapist can be supervised by a medical doctor somehow, and do that from the comfort of one's couch. When somebody is like I talked to a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist who uses esketamine, and like he has to do it in the clinic, but it's actually a lot of times the last place on earth his patients want to be.
Yeah.
And the other crazy part is like, if you are having suicidal tendencies, if you go and check yourself in to the ER and they put you on the psych ward, you're 220 times more likely to kill yourself there.
In the psych ward.
In the psych ward.
Yeah. We really need to fix that. Tomorrow actually releasing an interview with a psychiatrist critiquing a lot of this stuff. And like, we've got to really do this based on data. Like, if you're putting somebody at more risk, like, what the fuck are you doing as a physician? Like, there's no real reason to do that.
Yeah. And like other crazy things that like happen around hospitals and places where we're supposed to heal people with mental health. Like, it costs $8,000. I think there's an average cost in New York City when somebody gets checked in for an inpatient admission for a mental health issue. That costs us all, everyone. Like, that's why insurance is high. Like, it's because the heavy users of the system, it gets spread.
Yeah.
And so like psychedelics are like, from a value standpoint, very logical to an insurance company, right? If you can solve mental health issues, not only will it bring down the mental health costs, but an alcoholic or an opioid addict has a far bigger spend than a normal, healthy adult.
How have those conversations gone with insurance companies, JR?
So they're still waiting for the data because like,
okay,
just going to wait for the data. Like they're not your bastions of
innovations. They're not innovators. They are slow downers in a lot of ways.
They're nice people.
Totally.
I think they mean well. I think they're just like sort of set up in a system that doesn't really make any sense. But like, I think what we're going to have to do is value-based care pilots. We're going to have to work with psychiatrists that understand that kind of stuff. And like, value-based care to me is like super interesting for the space.
And that's kind of like total cost of care.
Yeah. It's like, well, hey, this person like cost the insurance company $150,000 last year because they checked into the ER like 6 or 7 times, and they're on like a whole host of SSRIs and other stuff that like trains. And okay, like, how do you deal with that person? If you could solve a lot of their mental health issues with psychedelic treatment and therapy, like, how do we capture more of that? So that's super interesting for me, because you're actually like saying like, hey, don't like, if we took it just like all on risk would be, I don't know, like a cool, interesting thing to do. It's just like, hey, like, don't pay me anything for the psychedelic treatments. But if I can decrease your costs by 50%, give me half. Then like, nobody has any risk. Like, okay, here's the data. It works. Well, it's still called LSD. Great.
yeah. It's going to be hard, but I agree. I think that's the right way to go.
Like, we have to be innovative. Like, not only just in like, how do we, solve the issues around how the treatments are scaled, but like, how do they eventually get paid for it too? Like, a totally new asset class. It's a totally new paradigm. And I don't think you can just apply the pill a day for the rest of your life pharma model here, because it's not a pill a day for the rest of your life. And we're not, as a company, seeking to try to create an annuity for ourselves. We're trying to bring value to society. And I think because we bring that value in solving and healing people, we should get paid for it.
Yeah. Now, another fun topic, and I'm really excited to talk to you about this. So you had a lot of interesting press around like a trip stopper. I don't really know how you're phrasing that these days, but what can you tell us about that drug? Like, it does seem like it addresses an acute need in terms of like, people are afraid to jump in without something like that. But how do you like to talk about this?
Well, I think when I talk to friends that have never tried a psychedelic ever in their life, the number one concern, or like the first question they ask after I say, hey, look, actually, I really think you could benefit from this. You have some issues and you need to work through them. And like, this saved my life and I hope it saves yours. It's amazing that the person who can like put 2 8-balls up their nose in an evening says, well, what if I have a bad trip?
Yeah, right. Yeah. I've heard that a lot of
What
times.
if you overdose on fentanyl? Like,
yeah, man. Did you spend $2 on your test strip, man? No, you didn't. All right. Good luck.
Who cares? Like, should be the answer. But and frankly, like, the bad trips are probably the most therapeutic ones. I think anyone
I appreciate you saying that. Yeah.
who's explored would agree with that. But at the same token, like, if we're gonna get people willing to heal themselves and like get over the stigma, I think it's important to have the feature of, look, we have the emergency stop button. Your therapist can press it if they need to, when they feel that you've reached a point that, you know, is not good anymore.
Right.
And I think that ultimately, and like, we'll have to study this, but might make the experience even more therapeutic. Like, going into an experience
because they feel safer.
Yeah, like,
I agree. Like, the more safe you can have someone feel, the better, especially at the beginning.
Yeah, they should be walking into a cocoon and we're taking care of them, right? They should not be walking into, or, you know, sitting on their couch going like, holy shit, am I going to die because I'm taking LSD or psilocybin?
Right.
Right. Like,
right.
That is not.
I'm dying. Get me. It's like, well, let's hold on, pump the brakes for a minute. But yeah, like, we've got something for you.
All their bad problems that are like actually exist, and focus less on the fact that like the 1960s and headlines have pervaded the society to classify these substances as evil and that they're going to kill you, which is like as far from the truth as possible. Right. Like, I think David Nutt put out that study like a number of years ago, which I think he was forced to like resign, which is completely illogical. But
the drug policy, the drug harm scale.
Yeah, it was like alcohol is like the worst thing for society.
Yeah, harm to self and harm to others. It's a pretty rigorous study.
Yeah, but I also think if you talk to like most alcoholics and most families of alcoholics, they'd probably agree with you. They'd be like, yeah, that sounds about right. Like, So I don't know.
Yeah. And so is the idea that you'd be able to like inject something and have it stop within like 30 seconds or like a couple minutes?
The administration, I think, is yet to sort of like be figured out on exactly how we would want to do that, because I think needles are also really scary. But yeah, I mean, the ideal is to like within, 20 to 30 minutes of taking this substance, like you could just stop it dead in its tracks. Or neutralize it, as I like to refer to it as the neutralizer. And like, I think it's going to work. Like we know, like the study's ongoing, right? Like, or sorry.
And you think it'll be better than a benzodiazepine?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about benzos in a sec, but like,
it was pretty rough, but yeah.
Just correction. I believe that study is starting in either end of this year or early next year, where we're actually
very cool.
And it's going to be a super quick study. Like, it's not going to take very long. So I'll be able to come back here like next year and be like, yeah, it worked. But when you talk about benzos, like, okay, right. So let's use like the one substance that like we're telling everybody they shouldn't take, because we're like, hey, like there's got to be a more effective like version of a benzo.
There should be one that's a lot safer and, like a lot less harmful. Like, yeah, like how, and, I guess my position on it, JR, is like, we've got these things, you take it once, it's not like you're taking it for 40 years to address a single psychedelic bad trip.
Yeah.
So, in the underground, that's pretty common, right? Like you keep one in your pocket just in case. It's not like you ever use it really, but once in a while. But I agree with you. It's kind of a drug to be avoided largely.
I would say it's like a really good thing to stay clear of. Like, I've been addicted to Xanax.
Oh.
And I've been in Xanax hazes that I don't really remember, like 2 or 3 week periods of my life.
Right. And it's because you were taking it daily.
Yeah. and it comes down
At pretty high doses, probably.
very high doses,
Yeah.
mixed with cocaine and alcohol.
Right. It's incredibly scary how common that kind of use case is
Yeah,
in some
really scary.
subcultures. Like, it's really fucking wild.
But it's like something like 30 or 40% of opioid overdoses are I believe there's like comorbidity with Xanax.
Huh.
I'm trying to remember the name of the study, but like it is a deadly combination.
Yeah.
We've
And people are
talked a lot
drinking like
about the
crazy on
opioid
it too.
crisis. We have not yet, as a society, realized that the Xanax crisis is just around the corner.
Yeah. I feel like we're deep in it and it's just not gotten the publicity yet.
Well, we're deep in it, and nobody probably realizes it because they're all on Xanax, and Xanax does like a really good job of just like pacifying you and just like being in agreement. Like, yeah, it's okay. Like,
Right.
it's the days. And yeah, I don't know. I would just like rather not ever put Xanax in my body again. But so I'm just gonna.
No, and the thing I like, JR, about what you're doing is you're developing new drugs. Like, I believe the world needs a lot of new drugs, like a real lot of new drugs.
Yeah,
Because, nothing's perfect. Like, the fact that people are on SSRIs for a super long time when that wasn't really the intention when these things first came out.
they're highly addictive. I've
It's not great.
had SSRIs too. It's like
Yeah, like we need to continually do better, and like you were saying, progress over time is really the solution here. Like, we need to slowly progress. Maybe we need to become a little more moderate, as you're saying. Like, I lean towards radical,
yeah.
but no, we need to just keep progressing, and capital needs to be brought in to help us bring these new drugs to market. It's kind of like no way around it.
Like I agree, right? As that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. But like
Yeah.
I also like to like always listen to the other side, right? Like I'm not against the conversation. What I'm against about is just like being divided. Like, to me, that just doesn't help anybody. And not being willing to even have the conversation. And so like I'm willing to listen like why that, you think it should just be a nonprofit. Like I'm not saying you specifically, but like other people in the space. And why we should just legalize it on a state by state basis. But at least let me like talk to you on why I want to do it this way and why I think it's the better way. Doesn't mean that it is, but it's the way that I find more efficient. And I think, a lot of investors and people are getting behind that. There are also a lot of people getting behind the nonprofit side, right? Like MAPS just had a record fundraise, like $30 million.
Yeah, and I don't want them to stop, right? I want them to keep going, but I don't think it's the only path.
Totally. And like, look, it's taken MAPS a long time to get to where we are. And like, we should also pay homage to the fact that, Rick is, in many ways, an amazing figure to like get us to where we are. Does that
Yeah.
mean that like the nonprofit model is going to scale MDMA access for all Americans that have PTSD? I'm not 100% sold on it. I'm not there yet. I hope it works out. I'm just not there.
Right. Yeah. I think an important point, like, there's this huge culture behind us, right? Like, this has been going on for many, many decades. And neither of us would be here really without them.
Totally. And people should pay homage where homage is due, right? Like that, like give credit where its credit is due. It's like, basic character trait.
Mm-hmm.
We should thank Rick, like thank you. And we should thank all the scientists and all the, underground therapists that were out there helping people. So, when this wasn't the fancy stock of the year, or it's when Wall Street didn't, want to provide funding for it, because a lot of people did this, like when everyone told them it was evil. And I think they should be thanked for that. Like they genuinely wanted to help people. And like Peter Gasser, for example, like, he since the 80s in Switzerland has been like fighting for compassionate access, right? And now like works on a lot of our clinical trials. We also support his compassionate access. We donated $50,000 this year so that folks in Switzerland can access compassionate use programs there. there needs to be like more of that. And, I just, like, there's a lot of great people in this space. We should somehow figure out a way to have a better conversation. I know that's like extremely difficult given the fact that we're all in isolation right now, but
right. Yeah. It's it's a really tricky scene we're in right now. Like, I don't know about where you're at in Florida, but it's not pretty here. Looks like all restaurants will be closed for like 2 months or something like that. Like, we're not allowed to hang out with other families. It's looking like a really grim time. And I really wish we had like better mental health care situation. Like mental health care access is like a really big issue. And like people just don't have access.
Huge issue. Like there's 60% of US counties don't have a psychiatrist present.
Good Lord.
And then I think it's like something like 59 or 60% of psychiatrists don't accept insurance. They're all private pay. That doesn't seem to really be working, does it?
Clearly not. No, especially if we're hospitalizing people and they're at a greater risk of actual suicide. Like, it's not ideal. So yeah, like the way out, like a lot of innovation, a lot of new thinking. And like it's kind of an interesting dichotomy, JR. Like it's helpful to be moderate, but like this is a pretty radical thing we're all doing in terms of psychiatry. Like, we really need to revolutionize psychiatry.
Even more to my point, which is like psychedelics as a topic is a radical topic for most people.
Yeah.
Right. When I told that first to Kevin O'Leary, he's a pretty like conservative, moderate guy. Right. And when I told him like, hey, like come invest in my psychedelics company, he literally looked at me like I had horns in my head. And not until I showed him the data on why this was actually going to work did he like get on board with it. And so like my mantra, I think, for the space is, and I think even like, is it Tom Insel said like had a really good quote on this, which is these are untraditional substances that need to take a traditional route. We need the starch white collar right now, or otherwise we risk just people calling us like crazy and from the 1960s. And so like if we can be as a community more moderate, I think we would have more people listening to us. And I think we're at this sort of cataclysmic event, which is COVID-19, right? Like the biggest rat park models in human history just happened. And so for
only halfway through, but like rat park model is super interesting. Like, addiction increases 19-fold when rats are in isolation versus when they're like in a happy little city of rats. Well, great. Like that's exactly what's going on right now. And you're telling me that restaurants are not going to be open for the next 2 months. Great. Even better. So yeah, halfway through that, hopefully, because like scaling a vaccine, that's going to take a long time. But I think like if we're just more moderate, maybe, just maybe, for the first time in recent history, we can actually create an accessible mental health system that is underpinned by psychedelic medicine. And that could help a lot of people. There's a Fadiman line a while back. I think it was him. It's like, I chose this persona, this button-down persona, because I saw like all these other people being fairly ineffective, dressing like people in the 60s did. So I think the line was, be weird in one way in your public persona, and you're a lot more likely to be accepted and be effective. Like if you're weird in very many ways, people tend to not want to listen to you. So yeah, like maybe put on a suit when you're going to go talk to these folks out there. Like it's okay. You're on this mission for evolving culture and medicine and a lot of other things, like this is not a one factor thing. Yeah. So JR, one of the things I wanted to kind of chat about, like people, and we can kind of wrap pretty soon too, but people are concerned, perhaps rightly so, because they've seen how politics in the US and the world works around like lobbying groups and whatnot. Like just how long it took for Purdue Pharma to get a little bit broken up, like It's kind of crazy. So I think a lot of Americans are quite distrustful of capital because they kind of see how influential capital can be. And like the concern is, will psychiatry dominate psychedelics for the next 20 years or longer, Like how do we kind of work together to try to, protect non-psychiatric uses? And that's a big thing we talk about. We talk a lot about pastoral counseling perhaps being a good way forward because it's not really corporate, and it ties neatly in with people's religious worlds. But that's just one of many possible creative thinking angles. Like again, I'm totally into this. Psychiatrists should be able to prescribe this stuff, and we should be able to use it. But like, my vision's a little bigger. How do you like to respond to that kind of thing?
I think you're talking about two different use cases, right? Like,
yeah, well, psychiatric and then everything else. Like, I'm just saying, I don't want psychiatry to dominate psychedelics.
Yeah,
long term.
I hear you, and I think for psychedelic assisted therapy, the last word is therapy, right? Requires a therapist. So
yes,
that's what I'm pursuing, or MindMed is pursuing. So we're going to focus on that. And like the question I think you're asking is like, is it going to be the only way to access psychedelics is if you're crazy? Like, or
I guess the question's more like, do you think, MindMed and some of your, competitors might work really hard to make sure we don't have non-psychiatric access? Like, do you think they'll work to perpetuate the drug war?
I think we're going to work to try to help 40% of Americans that have a mental health issue or a substance abuse disorder. That's
right. You're going to work on the primary thing, not necessarily work against what the public might want.
Yeah, but when you talk about like an addressable market for an entrepreneur or a company or anything, like 50% of the country, that's crazy. I think
it's a huge amount of people.
It's going to have to be like 20 MindMeds. And I hope that they're eventually...
No, the ecosystem is going to be huge. Absolutely.
To solve that problem. And I think we're going to be so damn busy just focusing on that I don't think we're going to have time to lobby and try to exclude people from pursuing, whatever they want to pursue on their free time.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I can see why the other side of it perceives corporadelics as a threat, and even made the word corporadelic.
Yeah.
Kind of a funny word, but hey, whatever. It's a word now. So words are powerful.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people make a living from them. So I don't see it as an immediate issue. Like I was the first, like I was in the Financial Times. They called me up and they said, so you must be totally against what happened in Oregon. And I said, no, I'm not totally against it. I think it's a positive step in the right direction. I think it's the voice and the will of the people that we have some really big problems in society. And I think they all were sitting in isolation for the last 9 months and realized that, and they're voting in that direction. Does that mean that I think it's going to be the most efficient way that we can deploy these medicines to the rest of the country? No, but I don't have anything against what happened in Oregon. Like, I think if anything, it brings more eyeballs to the space and more people thinking about it in the various regulatory agencies on like, how do we actually help people? But look, there's always going to be a community of folks that say like, we don't need the psychiatric departments. We don't need the therapists.
Totally.
Mushrooms.
Yeah.
And we want to, have them and pet them and whatever. And that's fine. And they should be entitled to their opinion. There's a lot of people that, believe gun policy is great too. Like, doesn't mean it's right. Or sorry, not gun policy, but the lack of gun policy, for certain people and so forth. So look, I think there's going to be differences of opinion. I'm focused on the immediate term. I'd love to get to the point where we have destigmatized these substances enough in society that people value them for what they are. And I think we will be a much better society when we get to that point. but I don't think we can do it all at once. People tried that, didn't work. And I would just hate to watch the potential for so many people that are actually suffering from mental health and addiction not get access to this treatment because we went too fast. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think, Pollan got a lot of crap for many reasons, but when he wrote that New York Times op-ed, it was like something like Psychedelics Not So Fast, or I can't remember the exact title. But I think he kind of is right. Like, let's not go so fast. Let's get it right. And so it might take a little patience from everyone in the community, but I think we'll get there.
My attorney yesterday told me, don't fuck this up. And I think the psychedelic community has been told that many times, because this is, like, we don't want this shit to get shut down again. But that said, I feel like we're evolved enough. Like, culture has evolved. The internet is here to the point where you can't lie to people the way you could in the 50s and 60s anymore.
I don't know if I agree with that statement.
About drugs, no? Like, you don't think scientists would step up and say, you guys are very wrong?
Fake news got somebody, with Cheeto hair elected. So I feel like, if anything, social media has created a new way to manipulate our minds. And so, I'm not totally in agreement there. Like, I think people are getting much better at manipulating society, and it's kind of sad.
Yeah, no, it's, psychology is a science. It's being applied in many different ways, in many different verticals. So it's definitely, psychology, like, so many things can be weaponized. I think that, at the same time, guns can be used as weapons, so can't psychology and medicine. So it's a tough deal, but this is, again, march of progress. Like, we've got to establish these beachheads, which are, these drugs getting through, and many other angles, like religious beachheads too. And we just got to keep moving. And don't screw it up, because this is a really big opportunity we're working in right now.
So I think you guys should that should be a great, Psychedelics Today t-shirt. Don't screw it up. with your psychedelic mushroom, like, right above
it. Yeah, it's not a bad move. Cool, JR. I think we're at about time. Is there anything else you might want to throw in before we wrap?
Yeah, I think, in the beginning of the podcast, we sort of talked about drug policy and the DEA. Like, they're just sort of let's sort of lob hardballs at the DEA because of the drug war. Like, I've met with a lot of DEA folks. Like, I think they have been given a task by our politicians. And I think if we were to just look at our drug policy in an objective manner, that we should probably be prioritizing treatment. I think you get a lot more people in agreement with you on that. And
and that's typically our talk track. So I agree.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But it's just radicalism, I think, and sort of attacking them isn't going to help solve the problem either. It's let's focus on a policy, whether that is Portugal or whether that is, whatever, some hybrid version of it. Oregon just sort of supported, hey, people shouldn't go to jail for using drugs. Seems logical. But we need to get to a middle ground on that, and we need to get there quickly, because I agree with you. Perpetuating the drug war is just going to put more people in prison, and prisons are getting more expensive, and that doesn't really seem logical.
Right. It's never really worked. Prohibition has never really been effective.
Right. But at the same time, the treatment infrastructure that we have for mental health and addiction isn't really working either. So I think we should invest more in that than prisons. I don't think anyone in society, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or whatever you may be, is wakes up and go, we need more money for the prison system.
There's a few of them out there, but there's not too many.
Well,
they're mostly the ones invested in the private prisons.
Yeah, I can't say the same about people whose kids struggle with addiction and died of an overdose. Like, I think they're probably waking up and going, why aren't we investing more in this? And so,
yeah,
I just think we need to have more of a discussion around capital allocation when it comes to treatment.
Amen.
So,
all right, JR, what's the website?
My website or MindMed's website?
MindMed.
Website?
Yeah. Yeah. Send everybody to psychedelicstoday.com. It should be enough.
Best podcast in psychedelics. Best company in psychedelics. MindMed, MindMed.com.
Cool. And you're publicly listed?
We are publicly listed, yes.
Cool. Actually, I think I have some.
Perfect.
Don't tell anybody. All right. JR, until next time, like, I definitely want you to come on to talk about once you have some results from your neutralizer.
For sure.
And maybe you could come on with Pete Gasser. And good, I don't really know too much about him at this point.
He's pretty good.
But awesome. Yeah. Maybe we can have the two of you on together at some point to talk about Switzerland.
Yeah.
And there you have it. JR Rahn of MindMed, CEO. And it's a really cool interview, different from what we traditionally do. And I'm glad we did it. I'm glad we finally got JR on the show, feature MindMed a bit. And yeah, so what'd you think? Let us know over at psychedelicstoday, email@gmail.com. And you can hit us up on socials as well. Yeah. We received a complaint recently that we're still using Gmail for our inbox. We'll look at addressing that. Very sorry. If anybody has privacy concerns, definitely understand, and we'll figure out a way forward there in the near future. Yeah, I guess that's essentially it. Thanks again to JR for joining, and thanks to MindMed for letting him join. And maybe next time we can have like a science officer from MindMed, so we can actually get into a little bit of the science behind the trip stopper, the LSD neutralizer, and whatnot. Because it's important to have more drugs. Like, we need drugs like this, especially if the drug has very different profile from something like a benzodiazepine. So I think that's it for now. Thank you all for tuning in. Support us by buying with some of our classes over at Psychedelic Education Center, or just tell a friend. Yeah, one of the best things you can do is share this with your friends and family, and helps us tremendously. It's quite flattering when you do, and we really appreciate it. So I guess that's it for now. Thank you all for tuning in to Psychedelics Days. Joe Moore signing off. See you on Friday.